Episode 122 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all doing? Welcome to a new episode. This is an episode especially for you Russian speakers or interpreters, indeed translators, with Russian in your combination. And yeah, well, I'm afraid it's not going to be anything cheerful in this episode. I'm afraid it's we're going to be having a look at the subject that is sort of in all the headlines. Obviously, the conflict in Ukraine. Now, I've done a couple of these before recently on what's going on there. We did a statement by Putin a few weeks ago, and then there was another statement by Russia that we looked into again. Maybe was it last week or so? Anyway, so I've got something unusual, interesting today. Obviously, just by the nature of the language, I put out a lot more material from, I guess, the Russian side than I do the Ukrainian side. I mean, I don't know any Ukrainian, I'm afraid, so I can't really help interpreters with the Ukrainian. But obviously, there's no shortage of material from the Russians. However, every now and then it's interesting because at the UN, usually the Ukrainians will speak English 99% of the time. However, there is always that 1% when you do actually get some material from the Ukrainians in Russian, and this actually happened last week. So the meeting we're going to be sort of sourcing today's statements from, it took place on the 30th of March. 30th of March, so that's last Wednesday, and it was, I don't know if you can see this, it was the High Commissioner's oral report on Ukraine, item 10. And what happens there, so this was specially devoted to the situation in Ukraine. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, made the introduction. She opened the topic, gave a long sort of introductory statement outlining everything that was going on. That's her statement there, you see. And then what happens in this format is that, she gives the main presentation, and then the other countries, all the member states have whatever it is, 90 seconds, 2 minutes to give their response to whatever the High Commissioner has said. So obviously we've got the Russian statement that they made. But what was also interesting during that meeting was that there was an appearance by the ombudsman of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, or Rada, so the parliament. And so it's interesting because the gentleman in question delivered that statement in Russian. So it's good to get sort of the perspective from both sides. So that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. We're going to be sort of just comparing and contrasting a little bit the two statements, and there's going to be quite a lot of elements that sort of are repeated, the use of vocabulary and expressions. But so this is a rare opportunity to basically compare what the two sides are saying. So we're going to start off. So I'm going to put the links to the original audios as usual in the description box. I'll provide copies of the transcripts as well, so you can just click on them and see and have them in front of you. And so what we'll do is we'll start off with the Russian statement. Okay, so you should be able to see in front of you then a copy of the Russian statement, just to give you. Just to sort of set the scene. So, I serviced this meeting. So I came in, the meeting was already underway, and Russia was just about to speak. I had about 3 or 4 minutes to prepare the statement. I thought it was going to be something easy. I thought it would be something like, I don't know, the situation in Sudan, which comparatively is obviously much less controversial. But I came in at the room, apparently it was on Ukraine and situation there, and this statement is pretty dense. What's sort of good about it is it's all about stuff that's happening on the ground in the various theatres around the country, And I say that's good because obviously that's going to be very relevant. The situation on the ground is changing every day, and it just shows how important it is really to keep following the news. I mean, I hate watching the news. I've said this before. I hate it. But when you have a situation of this nature, it is crucial that you keep up to speed with what's going on. And also if you're working from Russia, that means not just watching, I don't know, the BBC or even the New York Times, because they're not going to tell you what the Russians are going to be saying. So it's important to try and find a sort of source of a Russian source for what's going on. I know it's hard because a lot of these channels, a lot of these sources are sort of being censored at the moment. I think Russia's here in Switzerland. Russia Today is you can still get Russia Today and see what's happening there. So it's important to know what the Russians are going to say, and you need to find what sources you can. Okay, so let's see. We'll just go through this as a sight translation, but imagining, obviously, as usual, that we are doing this as interpreting blind. Like I said, I advise you when you do it for yourself, when you to do it without the text. I'm sure you've got a rough idea of what the situation in the country is in Ukraine, and so just try and do it, try and wing it. Use what knowledge you have, and then come and watch the show. And we can sort of go through the most important bits. So here we go. So, President, we are extremely concerned by the mass violations by the Ukrainian military of international humanitarian law and human rights. Maybe you just again say IHL for Международного humanitarного права. So, IHL is a very useful acronym for that. Okay, moving on. In Mariupol, by the way, so one thing in this conflict that's a bit of a big deal is the pronunciation of the names of the various towns, villages, and cities, whether to use the Russian or the Ukrainian version. I mean, it's quite controversial. Obviously, the Russians want the Russian version, and that stretches the name of the country. They'd probably call it the Ukraine as opposed to Ukraine. But I know, for example, in the Western media, on Google, I think even Google Maps, they've changed everywhere to using the Ukrainian version. So, it's no longer Kiev, but the Ukrainian version, which is Kyiv, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll just be sort of pointing that out as we go along. I think Mariupol, fortunately, is the pronunciation, I think, is the same in both Ukrainian and Russian. This is something to remember, for example, when, for example, France is speaking, about the situation, in theory, they'd probably want you to be using the Ukrainian-sounding version. In Mariupol, Boyeviki, I tend to say militants from the Azov battalion, from the Azov and right sector Natsbatalyon, nationalist battalions. I think when I did it, the guy was going very fast. I said in Mariupol, militants from the Azov battalion and right sector. Boyeviki, my sort of go-to word tends to be militants, as I say. Shelled refugees who were trying to leave the city going towards Russia. Now, this expression here, огневая точка. So because I was in a hurry here, actually this was, I think, the person who was in the booth before me had obviously started making notes, and I just copied that person's notes, and they put weapons were placed, which is pretty close. Weapons were placed in the houses of civilians. And now what I think basically means is that the militants, the Boyeviki, had set up their guns, their positions in these people's homes, and I think we would say gun emplacements had been set up. Or you could say, for example, firing positions had been set up. Now, you see, that's not me. That it's unlikely, if this is the first time you're doing this sort of subject, that expression is going to leap to mind. But okay, now going forward, just think about that. Again, this style of statement is going to probably be appearing a lot. So now where they set up their guns. We've got like a gun emplacement or a firing position. I know I used to read when I was a kid these comics. They're called Commando comics, all about the Second World War, and they always talk about like machine gun nests that the that the Germans had set up wherever it was, or whoever, the Japanese, whoever it may be. But anyway, I think it's a firing position, gun emplacement, had been set up in the homes of mирных жителей. That you'll see this expression is going to be used a lot. I tend to just say by both in this Russian statement and in the Ukrainian one. So again, I tend to just go with civilians rather than saying peaceful civilians. Maybe you could say it is the first time peaceful civilians, but I don't think you need to repeat it over and over again. Like I say, you'll see that it comes up a lot. Who had been выселяли на улицу или уничтожали, who had been thrown out onto the street, or who had been уничтожали, who'd been eliminated. I seem to think I was saying eliminated a lot. It seems strange in English to say that people had been destroyed. Okay, it just seems strange. I guess we say who'd been killed, who had been maybe executed. Maybe executed. Militants had used 150 civilians there as a human shield, живого щита. Okay, we say not a live shield, but a human shield. Okay. I mean, they put it a bit differently. They said there, militants had used 150 people civilians walking in front of them as a human shield. But I think you could just sort of slightly paraphrase that and say they'd used 150 people in a human shield. By the way, boyeviki, okay, they talk about, I say boyeviki a lot. Here they go again. There's one episode where I talk about the difference between boyeviki and opolchency. I think it may have been to do with, again, the conflict in Ukraine. So the Russians tend to refer to the boyeviki, they tend to be the bad guys, okay? Opolchency tend to be the militiamen, who tend to be the good guys. It's a good sort of two good words to remember as sort of antonyms. Okay, then here we have a whole list of events on the ground. Okay, 2nd March, Mariupol. I think I was almost saying it in this form. You can probably find my rendition there on the Digital Recordings website. It says something like 2nd of March, Mariupol, militants from the Azov battalion, led local civilians to the territory of the the mined Azov steel factory. So I know that factory is that sort of big, a huge plant. That's I think there's a lot of talk about that currently in the Battle of Mariupol. That's basically what the whole city revolves around, is that steel mill. Okay, planировался, and you see here my predecessor there, but the plan was, that's a very good way to render that. The plan was to blow up the factory and then blame Russia for executing civilians, for eliminating civilians. Yeah, you have to be very careful with the sometimes the vocabulary that you choose under these circumstances. You don't want to be putting words into these people's mouths. Yeah, they were planning to blow up the Russians say that they were planning to blow up the factory and then blame the Russians for the civilian deaths. 13th of March, Nikolskaya. During the retreat of the Aidar battalion, 300 civilians were taken hostage. So you can see here, I split this up, because I had the text before me. I was just able to make a couple of notes. So look, in English we would say 300 civilians were taken hostage. That's section 1. That's section 2. 14th of March, following a cluster bomb strike, кассетным боеприпасом. Okay, cluster bombs. That's an important expression to know, especially if you're ever doing this. There's a whole treaty on banning cluster bombs. So кассетные боеприпасы, cluster bombs. In the center of Donetsk, 21 civilians died, or if you want to the higher register perished for Pagib. 36 people were injured. The victims of this attack, there could have been 10 times as many. Okay, so it's okay if you have the text in front of you, because then you can sort of adapt it. You can turn it into good English. You can say 10 times as many people could have died in this attack. But if you don't have the text and you're just sort of doing it on the fly, you're just hearing, okay, victims of this attack. Well, there could have been 10 times as many. So you have to just sort of tweak it as you go along, okay? Which means that your sentences aren't going to be beautifully constructed English language sentences. A lot of what you're going to you say is going to be as if you're just, saying it in the moment. Only one of the 50 bombs detonated. Worked, sработало. On 15th of March, VSU, Военные силы Украины. So this is the Ukrainian armed forces, okay? VSU. Обстреляли, okay, обстреляли, shell. That's the classic, that's your my, again, go-to solution for anything to do with обстрел. They shelled at the mine in Donetsk with 294 people underground. National battalions and Ukrainian military have tortured prisoners. Okay, tortured. Now this is a tough opening to this sentence. Look at this. На имеющихся в открытом доступе видеозаписях. So you don't get that noun until the 1, 2, 3, 4, 6th word in. This is the videozapisi, right? Which is the important noun that you're waiting to hear. So it's good. Again, the person in the booth before me had written in here, I don't know if you can see it, in publicly available footage. Okay. So footage really is the important word again in English. So I think I said here in publicly available footage, you can see in and around Kharkov unarmed Russians being shot in the legs with plastic bags on their heads. Some of them are unconscious. So these were some of these videos that got out, was it last week, showing some of these unfortunate scenes. What would I have done if I hadn't had the text in front of me and I'm hearing на имеющихся в открытом доступе видеозаписи? Maybe I'd have said there is openly available footage. There is footage available from Kharkov showing, I think you need to throw in the word showing somewhere, okay? Showing unarmed Russians being shot in the legs, etc. So that would be a really tricky one to get if you didn't have the text in front of you. Again, at a push, maybe just if you're really struggling, maybe just leave out the в открытом доступе. You just say maybe there is footage from Kharkov showing unarmed Russians, etc. Now, Kharkov, that's one of these towns where you need maybe to know the Ukrainian version. The Russians say Kharkov. The Ukrainians call it Kharkiv. Kiev instead of Kov. So, I must admit, when I'm doing this kind of thing, that's not my top priority. Tweaking these names at this point, there's so much other information that it's so important to convey without getting the exact nuance of the pronunciation of the names of the towns and the cities. But you want to know it. You want to know what the two versions are, because I think once you become maybe more familiar with the stuff that's going on, then you can start to, I don't know, when the Russians are speaking, call it Kharkov, and when one or the other. When the West speak, or when a Western delegation speak, you can call it Kharkiv. So it's important to know these names in both languages. In a school in Mariupol, where Ukrainian militants were located, where Ukrainian militants were deployed. You'd probably say in English, where Ukrainian militants were holed up. But again, that's a tricky one to think of in the heat of action. The body of a girl was found. Ее долго пытали, that she'd been tortured for a long time. A swastika had been carved into her stomach. It's pretty grisly stuff. I mean, I'd read about this the day before about this incident, so I knew what it was about. But again, if you hadn't been aware of it and you're suddenly hearing that coming through on the mic and you've got to render it, well, difficult. So that's really why you have to keep close tabs on what the situation is. I mean, I don't know if that would have been reported on in the Western media. I don't know. So you'd have definitely heard about that in the Russian media, let's say. Her hands had been ripped off, оторваны. Все эти зверства, so all these atrocities, so that's again, sort of go-to word for zверства, atrocities, against civilians are being carried out using weaponry supplied by the Western countries. Okay, we urge the High Commissioner and OHCHR, УВКПЧ, Управление Верховного комиссара по правам человека. That's a very important acronym to know if you're working in my industry, OHCHR, to give an assessment of these facts. Just play it safe with an expression like that. To give a due assessment of these facts. I thank you. Okay, so that's the Russians. Okay, so later on, then you have this Ukrainian ombudsman. Okay. Верховна Rada, by the way, I think you can just call, if it's mentioned, you can certainly I call it the Rada. If I hear it mentioned, I just, that is the parliament. That is the Rada is the Ukrainian parliament. But like the Duma in Russia, I think the Rada is one of those, you can just call it by its own name. You can say the Verkhovna Rada. Apparently, I didn't know this, Ukraine is a unicameral parliament. So they don't have a lower house and an upper house. They just have a single house, and that is the Rada. Okay, so let's see what this guy said. President, ladies and gentlemen, in Ukraine, for the second month, идет разрушительная война. A devastating war is underway, is probably the best way of doing that. Вероломно развязанная, treacherously unleashed by the Russian Federation against all of the territory of our country. That's a tough, okay, I'm at the stage where I hear развязать войну and I can pretty much get unleash. But, a more basic word, treacherously launch. What do you do with the war? You treacherously launch it, if you want a slightly simpler word. This war was a continuation of the invasion launched in 2014. Когда были временно оккупированы. So again, we're imagining we don't have the text in front of us. And how we could tweak the text as we go along without, having to leave временно оккупированы to the end. So we might say, which saw the temporary occupation of Crimea and Sebastopol, as well as отдельные территории, certain territories of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. Now, oblast, I think, is a word that you can just, again, use the calc in English, just call them oblasts. People seem to be generally familiar with that term. Now, this is an interesting word here, отдельные территории. Okay, this I think is actually wording from the Minsk Accords that were signed in 2014 that sort of ended the initial conflict that took place back then. And the wording they use in the English version is the particular, they call them, in fact you can see here, I'm going to pull it up here, okay, the particular districts of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. So I think that отдельные is a reference to that. So maybe you can say that the particular districts of, or whatever, of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. В эти минуты, right now, войска врага, the enemy, the armies of the enemy, ведут обстрелы, here's your обстрел again, shelling towns in virtually all oblasts of our state. If you want a really neutral word for населенные пункты, you can say population centers, which covers everything, I guess, from a village to a town to a city, although it's a bit of a mouthful. So, yeah, I would towns, villages, whatever. Cynically violating the requirements of the Geneva Convention of 1949, the aggressor is deliberately shelling, and now he talks about what he's using to do the shelling with aviation, with missiles. Now this is an interesting expression, this системами залпового огня. So I think when I did this, I think I was just talked about artillery, but really it's a bit more than just artillery. I think what they're referring to here are these multiple rocket launch systems. You may have seen footage of them. You know, it's like these. Often they're mounted onto the back of trucks. I think the old ones were maybe called Katyushas in the Second World War, and they just fire off a whole string of rockets, and I think those are системы залпового огня. And I've just been looking it up on Multitran, and that seems to be the best solution. Multiple rocket launchers. So what he's saying, that whole paragraph is cynically violating the requirements of the Geneva Convention of 1949. The aggressor has been intentionally shelling and then using aviation, missiles, multiple rocket launch systems, civilian facilities, гражданских объектов. So this is what he's shelling. They've been shelling the civilian facilities, residential areas, nurseries, schools, and hospitals. But yeah, that's an important, that whole paragraph, the important expression there, I think, is системы залпового огня. They talk about that a lot. Every hour, the number of victims is growing among civilians. Again, look how many times they're using this мирного населения, and among civilians and children. 135 children have been killed, 173 injured. 4,500 homes have been destroyed, 135 hospitals, 566 educational institutions. The Russian occupiers have abducted civilians. As I say again, мирных жителей here, мирного населения, I think can all just be summed up as civilians. So they've abducted civilians, the mayors of towns and other representatives of the local authorities, or other local government representatives, social activists. They are killing and kaliechat. I think that the best option for that is maiming. They're killing and maiming representatives of the press. The war has forced over 3.6 million Ukrainian citizens to become refugees, 1.8 million of whom are children. 6.5 million people have become внутренне перемещенными лицами, IDPs. The number is growing every day. Okay, мы осуществляем сбор фактов. We are collecting фактов. Okay, when it's to do with something legal, I think you want to talk about evidence here. We're collecting evidence. We're gathering evidence, we're collecting evidence of violations of human rights by the aggressor armies for subsequent передачи международным, okay, for further referral, I think is the sort of the mot juste here whenever they talk about a given government or whatever sending evidence to a court to get that court to launch proceedings. So they were talking about referral. They talk about referral to the International Criminal Court, referral to the ICJ. So here for referral to international human rights organizations, правозащитные организации, правозащитные, that as an adjective, that means human rights organizations, and to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. As the Ukrainian Rada's ombudsman on human rights, обращаюсь к вам, safest thing to go with обращаюсь к вам, just say I call on you, because you never know what he's going to, the обращаться с, and it's hard to predict sometimes what what's going to come after the s. So I call on you on behalf of all Ukrainians who have been victims of the crimes of the Russian Federation in this inhumane war to используйте все возможности для, to, I guess, just to do your utmost in order to step up the sanctions pressure on Russia, to withdraw its troops or its armies from all the territory of Ukraine, to adopt a decision to introduce a no-fly zone, безполетная зона, no-fly zone over Ukraine, to create a special tribunal to condemn the crimes of the military aggression against Ukraine. Ukraina стояла и будет стоять. So whenever I hear an expression like that in Russian, it's the safest thing to do is just say Ukraine continues to stand in protection of European values and democracy. And then, you have these sort of three clarion calls at the end, if you like. Victory will be ours. Slava Ukraine. So I've heard that used quite a bit in statements at the UN, not just by, I know the UK delegate said that at one point at the end of a statement. So glory to Ukraine, Geroyam Slava, glory to the heroes. So there you have it. It's pretty grim stuff, whichever way you look at it. Hopefully we've learned a couple of new things. Like I say, for me it was particularly useful actually to look up in detail this системами залпового огня, multiple rocket launch systems. There is an acronym, by the way. You can call them, they are sometimes called MLRSs. Мирного населения, мирных жителей. There were a few variations on this, weren't there? I think it's safest just to go with civilians. Zverstva, this is a word, unfortunately, you're going to be hearing a lot of, presumably during this conflict. So atrocities. And, well, if you've learnt any new words, if you found any new interesting solutions, please do put them in the comments. If you've got any suggestions of your own for some of the vocabulary used, please, as I say, feel free to contribute those. To help, it helps all of us who are watching, helps all of us who are working in this field. And really, there's obsтрeli, shelling, classic military vocabulary. And really, with that, on that rather depressing note, please do like if you found the episode useful. Share it with your friends. Subscribe. Now I have got other videos actually again on this subject that I'm going to put up, so I'm going to leave a link here to this episode that I did a couple of weeks ago, where it was a bit of a medley, as I call them. It was statements in Russian, in French, and in Spanish on the conflict. And the other link you'll see up on the page is a link to the whole playlist of episodes that I've done to do with for interpreting from Russian into English. And there are several videos there on the situation in Ukraine. So go take a look at those. Anyway, nothing more to say then other than that episode 122 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.